My name is Evelyn Parker. I'm 35 years old, and right now I'm sitting at the corner of a white silk-covered table at the Four Seasons Chicago, where my family holds our annual reunion dinner. My older sister Laura just shot me that same familiar, slightly mocking glance across the crystal glasses. My father Richard keeps checking his Patek Philippe watch like he has somewhere more important to be, while my mother, Margaret, maintains her carefully practiced neutral smile. They have no idea who I really am. 10 years of working in the shadows, leading major federal operations most people will never hear about, is about to unravel completely, all because of one innocent comment from Laura's daughter Emma. Before I tell you exactly how my entire family's jaws dropped at the same time, take a moment to subscribe to this channel and let me know where you're watching from. Trust me, you'll want to see their faces when they finally find out who I really am. Fun 2. Joy Thieu Boy Candiadin and Apluk. Growing up as the middle child in the Parker family felt like living under a bright spotlight that never quite reached me. Our home in Lakeview, Chicago was a sleek, modern mansion with tall, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. Everything about it, every polished surface and expensive detail, seemed to scream wealth and expectations. The Parkers were supposed to shine, to impress, to uphold some grand legacy of success that none of us ever really asked for, but still, we carried it like a heavy coat. My older sister Laura was the star right from the first day she could talk. She had flawless presentations, and her career as a marketing director for a major cosmetics brand looked perfect from the outside. By 38, she already had a corner office, a six-figure bonus, and a social media feed full of yacht trips and fancy gala invitations. Every family newsletter seemed to include her latest achievement or some glossy photo of her posing at Paris Fashion Week. She was everything my parents admired, polished, accomplished, always in the spotlight. My younger brother David followed the family's creative streak almost like it was written in his DNA. By 32, he had become an architect whose skyscrapers now dotted the Chicago skyline. Dad would beam with pride whenever he introduced David at the country club brunches. He'd say, "This is my son, the architect," with that special tone he never used when he spoke about me. People would smile and nod, congratulating David for his vision and talent. His charm and those sharp blueprints won over clients from all across the Midwest. It felt so natural to him, like success was his birthright. And then there was me, Evelyn Parker, the quiet middle child who never fit into any of their polished molds. While Laura and David collected awards and applause, I was always just there, almost invisible. Instead of chasing a glamorous career, I chose something they never really understood. I enrolled at a state university, University of Illinois to be exact. To them, it felt like a step down, something almost embarrassing to talk about. Dad would sometimes sit in his big leather chair, swirling his glass of bourbon, and mutter that my degree was such a waste. His voice always held that tired disappointment, like he'd given up hoping I would ever measure up. Mom would just pat my arm in silence, her eyes soft, but never brave enough to defend me out loud. I used to pretend it didn't sting, but it did. After graduation, I told them I'd taken a desk job at the Department of Justice. Something safe and vague administrative work, I'd say when people asked. It was easier that way. At least Mom would say, "It's steady," as if that made up for what they believed I lacked. Dad would barely look up from his phone, already checked out from any real interest in my life. What they never knew, what I never planned to share, was that I'd been recruited straight into the DEA. I trained in Quantico and spent years dismantling international drug cartels. 10 years, in fact, of operations that saved lives, but had to remain invisible. While they thought I was sorting files, I was flying to Colombia, coordinating raids. It was a double life I carried alone, and in some strange way I almost preferred it that way. Last year, I led the team that finally shut down the Silver Crescent network. It was a ruthless cartel moving almost $200 million in heroin through the ports of Chicago. The Attorney General himself sent me a private commendation, a letter of gratitude that I tucked away in a locked drawer far from my family's curious eyes. Why keep my real career hidden? There were 3 reasons, and each of them felt heavier than the last. First, it was about operational security. My cases involved undercover agents and confidential informants. One careless word, even at a family dinner, could put lives at risk. Second, my family's attitude toward government work had always been cold. Dad once scoffed at a charity gala and said, "Government jobs are for people who have no better options." I overheard him tell his golf buddies that real success meant private jets, not public service. That memory never left me. Third, and I'm not exactly proud of this, I started to like the way they underestimated me. While they pitied my little desk job, I was buying a condo in Lincoln Park, outright paid in full with performance bonuses they could never imagine. Every annual reunion dinner was my stage to keep playing the quiet middle child. And honestly, there was a strange satisfaction in knowing I could outsmart them all year after year. This year's dinner at the Four Seasons Chicago was supposed to be the same as every other year. I had a plan and it was simple. I'd arrive early. I'd nod politely. I'd dodge their questions with bland, harmless answers. Then I'd slip out before dessert carrying my secrets with me. I wore a simple navy dress that night. Understated but crisp, the kind of outfit no one would remember. A habit I'd picked up after so many undercover briefings. The dining room glowed with polished silverware and soft piano music drifting through the air. It was the sort of place my father Richard considered worthy of our family's status. I sat at the far end of the long table sipping sparkling water, rehearsing my usual deflections. "How's the office work, Evelyn? Are you still in that tiny apartment? Do you need me to call in a favor?" Each question had a carefully prepared answer. Each smile was as practiced as any agent's cover story. But that evening, I hadn't counted on Emma Laura's 16-year-old daughter walking in behind them. She barely looked up from her phone. Just for a second, her eyes flicked to mine and something in her expression felt unsettling. Like she knew something no one else did. The conversation started predictably, as it always did. Small talk about the traffic along Lakeshore Drive, the chilly wind sweeping off the lake, and the menu's absurdly priced truffle pasta. I listened in silence, nodding when expected, my hands folded neatly in my lap. Years of field training had taught me how to look calm even when my thoughts were racing. Then came the ritual my family loved best. The updates, the subtle competition, the moment to prove who was winning and who was merely surviving. Laura led the charge, her smile sharp as a blade. She leaned back in her chair and announced, "We just signed a $5 million campaign for a luxury skincare line." Her fingers twirled the stem of her wine glass like she was performing on stage. "It's going global, Paris, Tokyo, everywhere," she added, her voice silky and just a little too loud. Dad clapped her on the shoulder, beaming with pride that seemed to fill the room. "That's my girl," he said, raising his glass in a toast that left no doubt who he admired most. David wasn't far behind. He cleared his throat with that quiet confidence he'd carried since we were kids. "I've just wrapped up the design for a new high-rise project," he said, his tone casual, as though it wasn't a big deal at all. "It's already won a National Architecture Award," he added, a small smile tugging at his lips. Aunt Diane practically clapped her hands, her eyes bright with admiration. "Oh, David, that's wonderful," she gushed, leaning forward as if she might hug him across the table. Uncle George raised his glass with a proud nod. "You're the next Frank Lloyd Wright," he declared, his voice booming enough for the other diners to glance over. Mom smiled so wide the corners of her eyes crinkled, her gaze soft with approval. I stayed quiet, picking at my salad, waiting for the inevitable moment when all those admiring faces would turn toward me. It never took long for that spotlight so cold and heavy to swing in my direction. "So, Evelyn, Uncle George," began, his voice sliding into that forced interest he always saved just for me. Still pushing papers at that government office, I opened my mouth, searching for the polite answer I'd practiced 100 times, but before I could speak, Dad jumped in, his tone dripping with the usual condescension. "It's important work," he said, waving his hand as though to dismiss the subject. "Keeping things organized behind the scenes." His words floated there, heavy and final, like they were meant to protect me from more embarrassment. Or maybe just to end the conversation quickly. Laura leaned forward, her smile stretching a little too wide. "You know, Evelyn, my firm is hiring assistants," she offered, her voice smooth as silk. "Better pay than whatever you're scraping by on." Aunt Diane nodded, her expression turning sweet in that way that always felt like pity. "Not everyone needs a big career, dear," she added softly, her hand fluttering over her pearls. I forced a smile, feeling the old familiar sting settle behind my ribs. My training had taught me how to keep my face perfectly calm even when the rest of me felt like it was splintering apart. It's fine, I said, my voice even practiced the same tone I'd used in countless interrogations. Laura tilted her head, her smirk sharpening like a blade. That dress, Evelyn, she murmured, pausing just long enough for everyone to look at me. It's practical. Did you borrow it from your office's lost and found? The table erupted with soft laughter, polite but edged with something meaner. Even Dad chuckled, though Mom shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I like it, I replied simply, my jaw tight though I kept my tone smooth. Dad lifted his whiskey glass, swirling the amber liquid. No need to worry about the bill, honey, he said, his voice so casual it made my skin prickle. I've got your share covered. Mom's smile faltered just for a heartbeat before she looked down and began rearranging her napkin again. It was her old habit, a quiet way to avoid taking any sides. Uncle George leaned back, his laughter echoing a little too loud. Government salaries, huh? He said, shaking his head as if it were all a harmless joke. Barely enough for rent and takeout, I bet. Aunt Diane reached across her hand, resting lightly on mine, her voice syrupy with false comfort. You're doing fine, dear, she whispered, her eyes soft with that same old pity. Not everyone can keep up with the Parkers. I took a slow sip of water, the coolness barely masking the heat rising in my chest. My mind wandered to the encrypted case files I'd reviewed just that morning. Names, numbers, accounts I had traced across 3 continents, and when I lifted my gaze, Emma was staring straight at me. Her phone forgotten her expression, curious. Like she was finally connecting all the pieces no one else could see. I tried to look away, but Emma kept watching me with that steady, searching gaze. Something about her expression made my heartbeat quicken. She tilted her head, her brows knitting together as if she was solving a puzzle she couldn't quite name. Around us, the conversation shifted back to safer topics: Laura's upcoming trip to Milan, David's new clients, the renovations on Aunt Diane's summer house. But I could feel Emma's attention like a bright light aimed right at me. Every time I glanced her way, she was still staring, her lips parted as if she was about to say something important. My fork hovered over my plate. For a moment, I imagined the entire truth spilling out right there. The years of classified missions, the arrests, the raids no one in this room would ever understand. I forced a slow breath, steadying my voice in my hands, but deep down a small, uneasy voice whispered that the moment I'd always dreaded was closer than I'd ever guessed. The sommelier arrived to describe the Bordeaux they'd chosen for the table. His voice was smooth, practiced a gentle distraction that everyone welcomed, everyone except Emma. She hadn't touched her phone again. Instead, she leaned slightly forward, her eyes fixed on my face with a focus that felt almost too intense. Laura lifted her glass, her smile bright and brittle. "Evelyn," she said, her tone lilting with false warmth, "I still think you should consider my offer. My firm really could use someone organized." Dad nodded, swirling his whiskey like it was a ritual he couldn't skip. "Laura's right," he added, his voice that same low rumble that used to hush a room. "There's no shame in accepting help when you need it." I forced a small laugh, though my throat felt tight. "I'm fine," I said softly, hoping that would be enough to end it. But across the table, Emma was still studying me, her gaze bright with recognition I couldn't ignore much longer. The waiter cleared our plates, replacing them with seared scallops and delicate sides arranged like tiny works of art. Laura set down her glass and turned to me, her eyes gleaming with something sharper than curiosity. "You know, Evelyn," she began, her voice pitched, sweet, and cutting all at once, "I admire how you keep things so simple." She paused, letting the words hang in the air just long enough. "Your little condo, your steady little job." Her smile widened, but it never reached her eyes. "Not everyone has to chase something bigger." Dad chuckled, though it sounded strained. "It's practical," he agreed, lifting his glass again. "Nothing wrong with that." I set down my fork, my pulse tapping at my throat. Emma shifted in her chair, finally drawing a deep breath like she'd made up her mind about something. I didn't know it yet, but the next words out of her mouth would shatter every lie I'd ever told. The room seemed to hush all at once, as if even the music had paused to listen. Emma set her phone down so abruptly it clattered against her plate. Her wide eyes never left my face. "Welcome back, Federal Agent Parker," she said, her voice loud enough that half the dining room turned to look. Mom gasped, her water glass trembling as she set it down too quickly. A few droplets splashed onto the white tablecloth. Laura's hand froze midair, her fork slipping from her fingers and landing with a dull clink. Dad stared at me, his mouth partly open as if he were trying to form words he didn't quite believe. David's usual easy smile vanished, replaced by something closer to disbelief. Even Aunt Diane looked stunned, her lips parted in a silent question. For one long second, no one moved or spoke. Then Emma lifted her chin and added her voice softer, but still ringing clear. "You're the one who spoke at my school about the drug cartels, aren't you?" My heart slammed so hard against my ribs I thought everyone could hear it. Mom lifted her napkin to her mouth, her eyes filling with something between fear and confusion. Laura finally closed her mouth, but her face had gone pale. She looked from me to Emma, then back again, searching for any sign this was some elaborate prank. Dad set his whiskey glass down with a heavy thud that made the silverware rattle. "What is she talking about, Evelyn?" he demanded, his voice suddenly sharper than I'd heard in years. I swallowed, feeling the weight of every secret pressing down on my shoulders. Around us, other diners were glancing over, sensing that something important was happening. Emma leaned forward, her expression earnest. "You showed us those photos, remember? The ones of the cartel safe houses?" I took a slow breath and met Dad's gaze head on, knowing there was no way to put this moment back in the box. "It's true," I said quietly. "I'm a special agent with the DEA, and I have been for 10 years. The words seemed to echo across the table, settling into the spaces between us like something heavy and undeniable. Laura let out a short, brittle laugh that sounded more like a gasp. "You, a federal agent?" she asked, her voice climbing an octave. "Come on, Evelyn. You file papers for a living." Dad leaned closer, his eyes narrowing as if he could read the truth on my face. "Show us your badge," he said, his tone low but unyielding. "If this isn't some joke." Mom pressed a trembling hand to her throat, her gaze darting between us. "Evelyn," she whispered, "why didn't you ever tell us?" David stayed quiet for once, at a loss for words, his fork resting untouched on his plate. I reached slowly into my purse, my fingers brushing the cool metal I'd carried for a decade. When I set my DA credentials on the white linen, a hush fell over the table, so complete it felt as though the entire room had stopped breathing. Laura's hands were steady most of the time, but now her fingers shook as she picked up my badge. She turned it over, studying the embossed seal, the photo, the name she'd never bothered to ask about. "This is real," she murmured, her voice flat and almost disbelieving. Dad reached out, taking it from her with a grunt. He examined every corner like he was hoping to find some flaw, some proof that I was lying after all. But there was nothing. No crack in the truth this time. "It's real," he admitted, finally, his voice low, almost grudging. He passed it to Mom, whose eyes filled with tears as she traced the letters with one trembling finger. David took it last, turning it slowly in his hands, his brow furrowed as he tried to fit this version of me into the sister he thought he knew. "DEA," he said quietly, almost testing the word. "Like, the real DEA," I nodded, my throat tightening. "Exactly," I said. "I track drug cartels, money laundering, smuggling, all of it." The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. No one seemed to know what to say next. Emma broke it first, her voice bright and certain. "That's so cool, Aunt Evelyn," she said, her eyes shining. "You're like a real-life hero." For a moment, no one corrected her. No one laughed. Laura finally cleared her throat, her gaze fixed on her folded hands. "You're telling me you've been doing this for 10 years?" she asked. Her tone caught somewhere between disbelief and something softer. "All this time, we thought you were just pushing papers." I looked around the table, taking in the stunned faces I'd grown up with. "I said I worked for the Department of Justice," I replied, my voice calm. "That was true. I just didn't correct your assumptions." Uncle George, who usually had something smug to add, sat back in his chair, his mouth opening and closing without a sound. The truth lay there between us, undeniable, finally too big to ignore. Mom finally found her voice, though it trembled when she spoke. "Is it dangerous, Evelyn?" she asked, her hand pressed against her chest as if to steady her heart. I hesitated, feeling the memories flicker behind my eyes. Sometimes I admitted quietly. "Last year, during a sting operation in Miami, things went wrong. I drew in a slow breath before I went on. I took a bullet to the shoulder. Missed an artery by an inch. Mom gasped, her napkin slipping from her fingers. Dad's hand dropped to the table, his glass rattling against the plate. For once, he didn't seem to know what to say. Laura pressed her lips together, her eyes wide, searching my face for any hint this was an exaggeration. Even David looked shaken. His confident demeanor cracked straight through. "You were shot," Mom whispered, her voice breaking on the word. I nodded, feeling the weight of every year I'd carried this secret alone. "Why, Mom?" asked, her voice so soft I almost didn't hear it. "Why didn't you tell us, Evelyn?" Laura was staring at me, her face pale, her fingers twisting the corner of her napkin. "Was this all some kind of game?" she demanded, though her voice lacked the old sharp edge. It sounded almost fragile. I looked down at my hands, the familiar scar on my shoulder pulsing in memory. "It wasn't a game," I said, lifting my head to meet their eyes. "I didn't tell you because it was safer that way." Dad swallowed hard, his jaw clenched as he studied me with an expression I couldn't read. "Safer," he echoed, as though he'd never considered that possibility. "My cases involved people who would hurt anyone to protect their money," I continued, my voice calm though my heart thudded in my chest. "And after a while, it was just easier to let you all believe I was nobody." The silence that followed felt like it stretched for miles. No one touched their glasses or their plates. No one dared to be the first to look away. My brother was the one who finally shifted in his chair, clearing his throat like he needed to remember how to speak. "We thought you were struggling," he said quietly, not meeting my eyes. We had no idea." I let out a slow breath, feeling something in my chest unclench just a little. My sister blinked, her lashes damp, her expression softer than I'd seen in years. "I called you a nobody," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I said it like it was true." Mother pressed her napkin to her mouth, her shoulders trembling as she tried to hold herself together. Father rubbed a hand over his face, looking older than I'd ever noticed. No one else spoke. The weight of all the years, all the assumptions and careless words settled around us like a heavy blanket we couldn't shake off. I rested my palms flat on the table, feeling the linen soft under my skin. It felt almost surreal that after so long, the truth was finally here, exposed under the chandeliers. It wasn't just about safety, I admitted, my voice low but steady. "After a while, it was easier to let you think I failed." My sister looked up sharply, her eyes glistening. "Easier," she repeated like she couldn't imagine choosing that. "Yes," I said, "because every time I tried to show you who I was, you didn't want to see it." Mother's hand slipped across the table, hovering just near mine, not quite touching. "We thought we were helping," she whispered, as if saying it out loud would make it true. I gave a tired smile that didn't feel like a smile at all. "You never asked what I did," I said, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "You only ever asked why I wasn't more like you." My brother looked down, his thumb tracing the rim of his untouched glass. He didn't argue. He didn't deny it. My sister let out a shaky breath, pressing her fingers to her temples as though her head ached from all the things she'd never seen before. "Last Christmas, I began, my voice softer. Now, you offered me an entry-level job. You told me it was something even I could handle." She closed her eyes. Her chin dropped to her chest. "I thought I was helping," she whispered, the words almost too quiet to catch. I felt my throat tighten, but I kept going. "When I graduated college, I continued turning to Father. You spent the entire ceremony on your phone. You didn't even look up when they called my name." He flinched like I'd struck him, his shoulders curling inward. Around us, the soft piano music started again, almost mocking in how ordinary it sounded compared to the heaviness at our table. I drew in a careful breath, feeling the sting of old memories sharper than I'd expected. "You never asked if I was happy," I said, my voice steady, but low. "You only asked if I was successful by your standards." Mother pressed her napkin to her eyes, dabbing at tears she'd tried to hold back. My brother finally looked up, his gaze searching mine for something he couldn't name. "We were proud of you," he began, though the words sounded uncertain even as he spoke them. "You were proud of the version of me you made up," I corrected gently, feeling a sadness that was almost tender. "Not the real one." My sister rubbed her hand across her mouth, her shoulders sagging. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice cracking. "I've been so cruel." I looked at her, at all of them, and for the first time in years I didn't feel like the quiet middle child. I just felt like myself. My sister lifted her head, her eyes red, her voice unsteady. I thought I was pushing you to be better, she said, each word tasting like regret. I see now, I was just tearing you down. She swallowed, her hands twisting together in her lap. I'm miserable in that job, she admitted, her voice small. The pressure to be perfect, to keep up appearances, it's crushing me. For a moment, no one spoke. Even the clink of silverware from other tables seemed to fade. I felt something loosen in my chest, a knot I hadn't realized was still there. It doesn't have to be like that, I told her quietly. You could walk away if you wanted. She gave a short, incredulous laugh that turned into a sob. I wouldn't even know where to start, she whispered, her gaze locked to mine like she was waiting for permission she never dared to ask for. I rested my hand over hers, feeling how cold her fingers were against my palm. Then start here, I said softly. Be honest about what you want, not what everyone expects. She blinked at me, her lips parting like she might argue, but no words came. My brother cleared his throat, his voice low. We were wrong, Evelyn, he said, meeting my gaze with something close to shame. I see that now. He glanced around the table as if daring anyone to contradict him. No one did. Mother's hand crept across the linen covering mine and my sister's together. Her touch was trembling but steady enough to hold. I'm sorry, she whispered, her eyes shining. I should have stood up for you. Father exhaled, the lines in his face deeper than I'd ever noticed. We all should have, he admitted, and for once he didn't sound like he was performing for an audience. I looked around the table at the faces that had shaped so much of who I'd become. For years I'd thought hearing those words would feel like victory, like proof that I'd finally won something. But in that moment all I felt was a quiet relief that almost hurt. Thank you, I said, my voice unsteady as it left my throat. I didn't expect any of this. My sister pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting back another wave of tears. I'm proud of you, she whispered, her voice raw, not because you were hiding some incredible career, but because you did it all alone. My brother nodded his jaw, set his eyes clearer than they'd been all evening. And because you still came back, he added quietly. You didn't have to. I closed my eyes for a second, feeling the truth of it settle into my bones like something I could finally keep. When I opened my eyes again, I felt lighter, as if some invisible weight had finally lifted from my shoulders. For so long, I'd carried the story alone, convinced no one would ever care enough to listen. Now, with all their eyes on me, I realized they were finally seeing me, maybe for the first time. I don't know where we go from here, I admitted, my hands folded in front of me, steady despite the tremor in my voice. My brother leaned in, his expression open in a way it had never been. We start over, he said simply. No more pretending. My sister nodded, wiping her cheek with the back of her hand. And no more assumptions, she added, her voice rough but sure. Mother's fingers squeezed mine, her touch warm through the linen. Just honesty, she whispered, her eyes soft. That's all I want. I nodded, feeling something steady and unfamiliar settle in my chest. Then that's where we start, I said, my voice stronger now. No more hiding. No more pretending to be smaller just to make everyone comfortable. My sister let out a shaky breath that turned into a quiet laugh, almost surprised at herself. I don't even know if I remember how to be honest, she admitted, her shoulders slumping as the words left her. My brother reached over, resting a hand on her arm in a gesture so simple it made my throat ache. We'll figure it out, he told her softly. All of us. Father looked down at his hands, his voice low when he finally spoke. I was wrong about what mattered, he said, each word deliberate as if he was trying them on for the first time. I'm sorry. For once I believed him. Around the table, everyone seemed to exhale at once, like we'd all been holding the same breath for years. My sister reached for her wine, her fingers still trembling as she lifted the glass. I don't know what happens next, she said, her voice quiet but sure. But I want to try to do it differently. My brother gave a slow nod, the lines in his forehead easing. Maybe that's enough for now, he said, glancing at me with a look I'd never seen before. Respect, plain and simple. Mother dabbed at her eyes again, her shoulders finally relaxing. It feels like we've all been pretending, she murmured, her gaze sweeping over each of us. And I'm so tired of it. Father looked at me, his voice rough. I am proud of you, he said, clearing his throat. Not for the badge, for the courage. And for the first time, I felt the words settle somewhere real. I swallowed hard, my throat thick with emotion I hadn't planned on feeling. For years, I'd rehearsed what I'd say if this moment ever came. But standing here in the quiet aftermath, none of those speeches seemed to matter. "Thank you," I said finally, my voice hoarse. "That means more than you know." My sister gave a watery smile, brushing a stray tear from her cheek. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," she admitted, her gaze dropping to her lap. "Maybe not," I said gently. "But you're still my family." My brother reached across the table, his palm open in invitation. I placed my hand in his, feeling the warmth of it anchor me in a way I hadn't expected. "No more secrets," he said quietly, meeting my eyes. And in that moment, I believed we might actually find a way to keep that promise. The waiter returned with the dessert menus, though none of us reached for them. It felt too soon for something sweet, too soon to pretend everything was back to normal. My mother let out a slow breath, her hand still resting over mine. "I want to know more," she said quietly, her eyes meeting mine without flinching. "About your work, about everything." I nodded, feeling my chest loosen a little more. "I'll tell you, I promise, though a part of me still wondered how much they really wanted to hear." My sister straightened her shoulders, her voice steadier when she spoke again. "I've been thinking," she said, "maybe it's time I walked away from my job. I can't remember the last time I felt proud of what I did." My brother didn't look surprised. He just gave her a small nod that said he understood. And for the first time, I believed we were all finally starting to understand each other too. My sister took a shaky breath as if saying the words out loud cost her more than she'd ever admit. "I turned in my resignation last week," she said, her voice low. "I'm starting with a nonprofit. It's a pay cut, but it feels right." For a moment, no one spoke. The quiet was warm this time, not heavy. I felt my lips curve into something that was almost a real smile. "That's brave," I told her, meaning every syllable. "I'm proud of you." She let out a choked laugh, brushing at her damp cheeks. "You inspired me," she admitted, her eyes locking on mine. "Watching you do something that mattered. It made me wonder what I've been doing with my life." My brother tapped his fingers on the table, a thoughtful look in his eyes. "Maybe we've all been pretending," he murmured. "Maybe it's time we stopped." I looked around the table at the faces I'd known my whole life. For the first time, they looked almost unfamiliar, softer in the glow of the chandelier. "Maybe it is," I agreed, my voice quiet. "And maybe that's a good thing." My mother reached across her hand, settling over mine, warm and trembling. "I'm proud of you," she said again, her eyes wet. "I'm proud of all of you." Father cleared his throat like he needed a moment to find his words. "I spent so many years at chasing the idea of success," he admitted, not looking at anyone in particular, "and I forgot what actually matters." My brother leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe it's not too late to figure that out," he said softly, the corners of his mouth lifting just enough to count as a smile. And for once, I didn't feel like the outsider. I drew in a slow breath, letting it fill the quiet that had settled over us. "It doesn't have to be perfect," I said, my voice low but sure. "We just have to try." My sister nodded, her expression soft in a way I hadn't seen since we were girls. "Trying sounds like a good start," she whispered, her fingers toying with the edge of her napkin. My brother tapped the table, his gaze moving from me to our parents. "No more assumptions," he said. "No more pretending any of us have it all figured out." My mother dabbed at her eyes, her shoulders finally relaxing. "I'd like that," she murmured almost to herself. "Honesty. Even when it's hard." Father let out a breath long and shaky. "Then let's start tonight," he said, meeting each of our eyes in turn, and somehow those words felt more real than any toast he'd ever given. I felt something ease in my chest, like I'd finally exhaled a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "All right," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was still thumping. "Then here's my truth." I paused, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "I love this work," I continued, my hand resting flat against the table. "Even when it's dangerous. Even when it's lonely." My sister blinked fast, swallowing hard. "And you're good at it," she said quietly. "Better than I ever knew." My brother nodded, his jaw tightening. "Better than any of us knew," he echoed. Mother closed her hand over mine, her touch warm and trembling. "Thank you for trusting us enough to tell the truth," she whispered, and for once I believed we might finally be ready to hear it. The rest of the dinner passed in a hush that felt almost peaceful. No more boasting, no more careful lies wrapped in polite conversation. When the bill came, my father didn't make a show of paying it. He just signed his name and set the folder aside, his shoulders eased in a way I hadn't seen in years. My sister reached for my hand as we stood. Her grip was firm, a little desperate. "Don't wait so long to come back," she said, her voice rough. "Promise me." I nodded, feeling something warm unfurl in my chest. I promise, I told her, meaning it. My brother pulled me in for a quick hug, his hand thumping my back. "You're not alone anymore," he murmured, just loud enough for me to hear. For the first time, I almost believed it could be true. As we stepped into the lobby, the lights seemed softer, somehow the evening chill waiting beyond the glass doors. My mother slipped her arm through mine, leaning just enough to remind me she was still there. "You'll be careful?" she asked, her voice small. "Out there?" I nodded, feeling the old ache in my shoulder where the bullet had left its mark. "Always," I promised, meeting her gaze. "I know how to look after myself." My father cleared his throat, his eyes steady on mine. "And if you ever need anything," he said slowly, "anything at all, you call." My sister lifted her chin, her expression determined. "Next time you come home," she said, "I'll be the one with a story worth telling." I smiled, feeling something shift into place that had been crooked for too long. We stepped out into the night air, the city lights spreading in every direction like a promise. For a long moment, none of us moved. We just stood there, taking in the quiet after so many years of noise. My mother squeezed my arm before letting go, her eyes bright but calm. "Come back safe," she whispered, her voice steady. "That's all I ask." My father nodded, his hand resting briefly on my shoulder. It felt heavier than I expected. My sister gave me one last look, her mouth curving into something almost like peace. "Be careful, Evelyn," she said, "and don't wait another 10 years. I smiled, feeling the warmth of them linger as I turned toward the street. For the first time in a decade, I didn't feel like I was walking away alone. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever felt unseen or underestimated, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your feelings in the comments below and let me know you were here. And if you'd like to follow more true stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There's so much more ahead, and I'd be honored to have you with me.